The Leadership in Law podcast is powered by Law Marketing Zone. Transform your firm's digital presence with expert marketing solutions tailored exclusively for attorneys at lawmarketingzone.com.
Welcome to the Leadership in Law podcast with host Marilyn Jenkins. Cut through the noise, get actionable insights and inspiring stories delivered straight to your ears. Your ultimate podcast for navigating the ever-changing world of law firm ownership. In each episode, we dive deep into the critical topics that matter most to you, from unlocking explosive growth to building a thriving team. We connect you with successful firm leaders and industry experts who share their proven strategies and hard-won wisdom. So, whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting your journey as a law firm owner, the Leadership in Law podcast is here to equip you with the knowledge and tools you need to build a successful and fulfilling legal practice.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership in Law podcast. I'm your host, Marilyn Jenkins. Please join me in welcoming my guest, Josh Cook, to the show today. Josh is a partner at Prince Lobel's Data Privacy and Security Group. He has a tremendous experience managing complex cybersecurity, privacy, and fraud issues, including more than a decade in-house with a Fortune Global 500 financial services company, where he served as the company's first global cyber counsel and launched its cybersecurity legal function. He has commanded dozens of critical cyber privacy and fraud incidences, guiding C-suites and boards through multiple crises. He wrote the book on how to manage a cyber attack, Cyber Resilience by Design, an executive guide to managing a cyber attack in 2024, and is frequently featured in publications and executive forums on cybersecurity, AI, and data privacy. I'm excited to have you here, Josh. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Marilyn. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about your leadership journey?
Sure. So I started my career more than 20 years ago in litigation. And, I was convinced coming out of law school that I want to be a litigator, and that's really where my focus was. After being a litigator for a few years, I realized that's actually not my favorite thing to do. And so it felt very natural. Most of my litigation experience was in the securities world. So it was securities litigation, defending broker-dealers and going after broker-dealers and investment advisors that had wronged their customers. And so it felt very natural for me to move in-house because that was a need at the time. And it was also just something that as I was looking around and realizing that litigation was not where I wanted to build my career anymore, moving in-house was just a completely normal and natural thing for me to do. So I moved in-house, and right out of the gate, I realized that, that was going to be a transformative experience for my career because it was a very, very different experience from the law firm culture that I had been in for several years at that point. One of the great things about my experience in-house was that at some point I was allowed to basically define what it was I wanted to do. And so the company, after a few years, had actually sold the retail broker-dealer that was my primary client. And, our general counsel came to me and said, look, you're not leaving us. So what is it that you want to do here? And what are you going to do when you're coming in every day? And so we talked a lot about cybersecurity and about privacy. And those were things that I had dealt a lot with because of my retail broker-dealer. And, the bad guys go where the money is. So they were constantly targeting the retail operations. And so, that really dovetailed perfectly with his vision for the company and the law department within the company going forward. Previously, up until I took on this role as global cyber counsel, cyber issues would happen all over the world. And this was a global company. So cyber issues would come up all over the world. And the lawyers that were attached to those impacted business units would jump in, handle the cyber issue, and then when it was over, they would go back to their daily jobs. And there was really no consistency across the globe. And there was no institutional memory, certainly not within the law department, about how these things should be handled day in, day out. So that was really the only marching orders I had were, make it consistent and remember what we do every time so that we can do it again. And other than that, I was just told by the general counsel, just do the right thing. Whatever happens, just do the right thing and I'll have your back. And that was really empowering to me. So I dove into this global cyber counsel role that had never existed before at this, massive international company. And the idea was, figure it out, right? Like I got no real guidance other than just do the right thing. And so I had to figure out what it meant to be a lawyer for a global company focused on cyber issues and focused on defense of cyber issues. So, I wrapped my arms around the entire company's global cyber footprint and said, all right, we've got groups in Japan and groups in Canada and groups in the US and groups, in Europe that are doing similar functions, but had never talked to each other and had no idea what each other was doing. So, that was kind of step one was, well, let's kind of take an inventory of who's doing what. How can we ensure that we're being consistent across the board? When consistency made sense, right? When it made sense to do things differently, fine, let's do things differently, but let's be deliberate about it, not just haphazard. And then it turned into, okay, let's figure out how to help the C-suite understand what the issues are across the globe, and then help the individual business leaders understand what their specific issues are. And so it was a multi-year project, but it allowed me to really understand what the business does and what the business needs are. And then, while all of this was happening, there were incidents, on a regular basis. And so, I became intimately involved in managing those incidents and ensuring that, we are doing things consistently day in, day out, that we have a strategy as opposed to just putting out fires here and there. It was, we have a strategy that we want to follow and we want to apply, and that's going to protect the business on a larger scale than just, putting out a fire here and there. And so, it was really transformative for me in my career. And I was in-house for 12 years. And when I left that company, I had this vision of helping smaller companies. But what really, really opened my eyes was the understanding that, when I was handling incidents at this, large international company, it never once crossed my mind that any incident could put the company out of business. Like, that was not ever on the table. It was going to survive regardless, right? Like, there was nothing that was going to be massive enough to put it out of business. But I learned that 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack.
Oh,
and
really?
that to me suggested, there's a real need outside of, the massive international, Fortune 500 firms. There's a real need for my expertise and my experience to help these companies weather the storm and to become resilient, because ultimately the resilience is the name of the game, right?
Right.
Everyone is going to get hit. Every company is going to get hit at some point, but, does it put you out of business, or is it an opportunity to grow and to become stronger? And, can you actually, in some circumstances, turn it into a sales point, right? Yes, we got hit. This is how we handled it. And, we're constantly keeping our customers front of mind. We want to make sure that everyone is protected, that we're doing the right thing. So you can actually leverage some attacks into a marketing pitch, basically. And so that's really what I try to bring to my clients is, not just look on the bright side, but turn it into a bright side. Like, let's address this thing that most companies, feel is a really terrible experience, and let's turn it around and say, all right, yes, this is rough. We're going to get through it, and we're going to become stronger afterwards.
I love that, because I think a lot of smaller businesses feel like only the big guys will get hit. I'm too small.
And I can absolutely tell you from experience, no one is too small. The cyber attackers out there typically go for targets of opportunity. So if they find an access point, they will exploit it. They'll try to exploit it. And, they don't know how big you are frequently until they're in your system. And so, there are attackers out there that are targeting the big firms, that are specifically going after, JP Morgan and Bank of America and Walmart, right? Like there are definitely folks that are specifically targeting big firms. But a lot of the attackers out there are just targeting whoever they can target, right? So if they get access, if they get credentials, if they find an exploit that they can get in through, they're going to do that. And then once they're in, they start digging around and figuring out, okay, who is this company? Is this somebody that we can take, that we can ransom for a lot of money? Or is this, someone that, maybe isn't going to really go anywhere for us? But they don't know until they're in. And once they're in, it's too late for the company.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. What do you feel like is the biggest, you've worked for Global 500, and now you advise clients in crisis. What's the biggest misconception executives have about cyber incidents?
I would say the biggest misconception is that it's a specialty problem, right? And that you need a specialty solution for it. And what I mean by that is, and this is really what prompted me to write the book in the first place, is the idea that executives frequently, during a cyber crisis, they'll step back and say, well, this is a cyber issue, and I need my cyber lawyer, I need my forensic firm, like they're going to handle it for me. And that really does the business a disservice, because every cyber issue is fundamentally a business issue. And if the business leader is taking a step back, the business leader is depriving the team of a solution and a management solution that it should have. But it won't have if you're only relying on outside counsel or if you're only relying on your outside forensic firm. They're going to put the fire out, but they're not going to necessarily see the larger impact to the business. And that larger impact is always there. And I'll give you an example. I dealt with an issue fairly recently where this was a large international company. They had a ransomware issue, and it was basically their data was exploited because they didn't lock it down properly. And so the bad guys were able to get in. Now, you might look at that and say, all right, that's a ransomware issue. We're going to deal with a ransomware issue. The real issue, though, was that the fact that their data wasn't locked down in this one jurisdiction was very, very similar to a publicized complaint that an internal whistleblower had made in media in a different jurisdiction about the fact that the company didn't lock down and secure its data. So, within a couple of weeks of that publication, now we have a ransomware attack, and it's really underlining the same exact issue, right? The company's not securing its data properly. So they're still dealing with the fallout of the media report, and now we've got this attack. And so the issue was not so much how do we deal with a ransomware attack. The real issue for the company was how do we make sure that we don't get a lot of publicity around this ransomware attack that's just going to confirm what the media already suggests and suspects, in another jurisdiction. So the last thing the company needed was an international problem when it, as far as the media was concerned, had really just been limited to this one jurisdiction, right? So
Right.
that it's just an example of the ways in which cyber issues they're typically reflective of larger business issues. And if you're only dealing with the cyber piece, you're ignoring the bigger picture. You're ignoring the bigger business risk that needs to be addressed. And that's where the business leaders really need to be involved, especially, in-house counsel, the senior business leaders. Those are folks that understand the big picture. And outside counsel and the forensic firms, they don't, right? They're not there day in, day out dealing with the business. And so they're brought in to handle a specific issue, and they handle it well, but it's the big picture that really needs attention.
I think an interesting part of what you bring to the table is those 12 years you spent and were given free reign. You built systems and processes. You built those communication channels. So you've seen how to bring the big picture together. So instead of, you might not know all the intricacies of a new client, but you know the processes to look for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And frankly, what I saw quite a bit, and I learned to identify, the communications gaps, right? And
Right.
where it frequently happens in many companies is a gap in communications between the senior leaders and between the IT folks. And, a good CISO, a security officer, will understand how to speak both languages, but those folks are really rare. They're hard to find. And so you end up with IT folks that speak in terms of IT, and you end up with business folks that speak in business terms, and they don't frequently get on the same page. And I've mediated disputes that I genuinely was worried were going to devolve into fisticuffs between senior leaders and senior IT folks, because the senior IT folks are like, no, this is a security issue. We cannot get away from this. We have to address the security issue. And the business leaders are standing there like, if we don't get this back up and running right now, we are going to have severe business consequences. And you have to be flexible, and the IT folks have to be flexible about the kinds of risks that they're willing to accept. Right, the business is accepting the risk, and the IT folks have to accept risk as well. But the business people have to understand the true nature of the risks that they're accepting. Right, and so that's where the communications can really become challenging. But it's really critical, and I can't stress enough how important it is to keep those lines of communication open. And it can't just start during an incident, right? Those lines of communication have to be open and free flowing all the time, or else you're getting into an incident expecting everyone to trust each other, and they're not going to. If the first time you're interacting with one of your IT folks is in the middle of an incident, that's a problem waiting to happen.
I agree. And I was in IT and have been in IT for a very long time. We won't talk about years. But it used to be IT was an island. You had the guy that walked around with the jump drive or the disk, and they were only called when there was a problem. And they just lived somewhere.
Yeah.
So now they expect them to be talking with the C-suite and planning and all of this stuff. Yeah, I agree. That would be a bit of a unicorn, the person that could do both.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when I first got into cyber, and again, I'm at this large international company. They had business units all over the place, and each business unit had their IT folks. The incident response team, though, was 3 people, and it was 3 people that were responsible for handling incidents for the entire globe, and they were literally just running from fire to fire. That was it, right? And by the time I left there, the incident response team had evolved into incident response, threat intelligence, assessments, and it was basically at that point 50 people. And for a global company, that's really what you're looking for, right? Like you need that many people involved. One of the luxuries you have when you have a larger team like that is all of a sudden you've got people that have the capacity now to build relationships across the company, when that 3-person incident response team never had that capacity.
Well, I'm sure they were running constantly.
That's exactly right. And so they couldn't build relationships. They couldn't conduct any trainings. They couldn't do any tabletop exercises because it was just fire after fire after fire. But when you build out that team and you have more capacity, you can really build the relationships too. And those relationships are critical to the resilience that you're looking to build.
And when you talk about resilience by design, in practical terms, what does that look like? Is that systems and conversation, communication?
Yeah, I'll preface this by saying I don't have an IT background. I don't have a technical background at all. In my experience, the failure points in what gives rise to cyber incidents, it's usually not the technology. It's usually the people that do something, completely natural for a human to do, but it's the wrong thing to do. For example, clicking a link in an email, or, it's letting your curiosity get the better of you. Those are things that humans do, and the bad guys exploit that human nature. So that's really where I focus. But resilience is having the systems in place, having the policies and the protocols in place and the playbooks, but very importantly, having the people in place that understand what they're supposed to do when things go wrong. And I can't tell you how many times I've done a tabletop exercise where, we're going around the room and it's like, all right, if this happens, and I get a leader standing up saying, all right, we've got a program, we've got a policy, we're going to do it, X, Y, and Z. And then I say, well, who's actually doing the work, right? So, oh, well, Tom's doing the work. Okay. Tom's not in the room. Does Tom know that this is his responsibility, right? And almost universally, it's like, well, it's his job. Like, we'll tell him, this is what you're supposed to do. Right. It's like, okay, it's one thing to go through this exercise on, within the IT team, right? Where everyone knows, okay, this is how, we shut down systems. This is how we have to, handle a DDoS attack, right? And it's another thing to do it on the executive level where, the executives think, all right, we have policies about this stuff and we've got people that do it, so we're good to go. You have to meld the two of them and really put them in the room at the same time and say, all right, okay, the CEO said we need to take this action. Who's doing it, right? And then you look at the person that's actually doing it. So, do you actually know how to do this, right? Yes. Okay, great. Then we're good to go, right? But frequently it's, well, who's doing it? I don't know. I don't know who's doing it. We have a policy that this is what we're supposed to do, but I don't know who's actually responsible, right? And that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's really that's the point of preparedness, is to go through it and make sure that you understand, what's supposed to happen, but very importantly, who's doing it. And that who piece is often overlooked.
Yeah, I think having the policy, because we're supposed to have one, is not as important as having a person assigned to do it. Exactly. So that when you're thinking about the essential elements, what are the essential elements that every company should have in place before an incident occurs?
Hey, real quick before we dive back in, if you're a law firm owner and you're tired of guessing what's actually working in your marketing, this is your sign to stop winging it. Law Marketing Zone works exclusively with elite law firms to bring in better clients, higher value cases, and real measurable growth. We're talking SEO, paid ads, local maps, call center support, and more, all done for you. Go to lawmarketingzone.com/book a call and book your case growth session with me. It's free, it's focused, and it could change the trajectory of your firm. Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, it really boils down to policies, playbooks, and people, right? So you need the policies in place, but as you said, having a policy that just sits on a shelf does nothing for anybody. In fact, it's frequently worse to have a policy and not follow it than to not have a policy at all, right? Because if you're not following it, after the fact, the regulators are going to come in and say, why didn't you do any of the things that you said you were going to do, right? And that becomes a much worse scenario for a company. But so you have the policies, and then you need to develop playbooks, which are much more detailed and specific for a particular role within the company, right? So, as the head of IT, your playbook for this particular type of incident is to do X, Y, and Z. As the head of marketing for this, or the head of public relations, your playbook says something completely different, even though it's the same kind of scenario, right? But you need those playbooks to walk the individual roles through what they're supposed to do when something bad happens. And those playbooks can include, like for public relations, a script for a holding statement, right? And it's just generic, yes, we're aware of the incident, we're looking into it. If you have any further questions, contact whoever, right? Mm-hmm. But that is stuff that you can do in advance, and you don't want to have to do for the first time when you're under fire, right? And that's really what it boils down to is, resilience is built on preparedness, and the example I give all the time is, you can walk into an exam and maybe you do great, right? You didn't study, you did great, fantastic, congratulations. I wouldn't try that a second time, right? If you want to do well on an exam, you have to study, you have to put the work in, you have to prepare for it. Maybe you get through without any preparation whatsoever, but why not stack the deck in your favor, right? Yeah. Like, why not increase your chances of getting through and becoming stronger on the other side of it? And so, it really is about preparing and being ready. And the way you do that is, line up your resources in advance. So, if you have a forensic firm that you want to work with, talk to them before you have an incident, right? Understand who they are and sign a contract before you ever have an incident, because I've been at public conferences where I've heard vendors stand up and say, hey, I see dollar signs when I get a call from a client that I've never heard from, like that I didn't know who they were. They call me out of the blue. They're calling me out of the blue during an incident. bam, dollar signs. I know this is going to be a great engagement for me. It's a stunning admission, but it's absolutely true, right?
Yeah.
But you do not want to be in that position as a client, as a business that needs help. You don't want to be doing that. Another quick example is law enforcement. If you want to engage the FBI, like if you have a ransomware attack, or if you've been the victim of business email compromise and an email thread hijack, and your invoices have been redirected and payments have been redirected to bad actors. If you try to call the FBI out of the blue, unless you are in the middle of a bank robbery, you're never going to reach a human being at the FBI. It's, leave a message. We'll get back to you when we have resources to get back to you, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing if you're a victim of a cybercrime and you go to ic3.gov and you fill out the crime complaint form, that's all great and you should do that, but they're not going to respond anytime soon, right? And so the way you get responses from law enforcement is to build a relationship with them before you ever have an incident, right? And so it's things like that really get you far down the path towards resilience. And it just takes a little bit of effort before anything goes wrong.
Yeah. So bottom line, get your book so you can do that and be resilient.
That's exactly right.
With AI accelerating both innovation and threats, what new cyber risks should organizations be preparing for right now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And, AI has really democratized cybercrime. Unfortunately, you can't necessarily do it with Copilot or ChatGPT because they do have some guardrails, but you can actually get around the guardrails too in some really bizarre ways. But it's not hard at all to find an AI product out there that will give you a kit for how to commit cybercrime, right? So, how do I find an exploit for X company? What's the most likely avenue of attack that's going to be successful? How can I monetize this? Where can I find a ransomware kit and how do I deploy it, right? And AI will walk you through that entire process. So the barrier to entry into cybercrime these days is not how much technical skill do you have, it's are you willing to commit a crime? That's really it. And so, you see a lot, the attacks are still sophisticated, but the attackers are maybe not as sophisticated as they used to be. So, they don't have to be as sophisticated. They don't have to have a lot of experience of hands-on keyboard, exploiting vulnerabilities within a system. They can just rely on AI to fill a lot of those knowledge gaps that they might have, right?
Yeah.
So that it creates a real challenge, particularly for smaller companies that don't have the resources to continually fight that sort of thing. But, while the AI has been used by the bad actors, it's also being used by the defenders out there, right? So there's a lot of firms that are really doing some magical things with AI to identify evidence of intrusions. Because one of the things that AI does really well is find patterns amid chaos, right? So you can feed it an extraordinary amount of data, and it will find patterns in there that a human would never find. So I was working with a company recently that is doing just that. They are ingesting truly massive quantities of data, and their AI is designed to identify anomalies. So, they basically can say, all right, this user is acting a little weird. Is this a legitimate user or not? Right. And so they can actually then say, all right, let's focus in on this particular user. Let's understand the behavior. Let's look back at what they've done over the past 24 hours, over the past 72 hours, and see if we can identify, is this an actual account holder, or is this someone that's just getting in with the account holder's credentials and acting differently and maybe exploiting a vulnerability? So, the AI is making everything faster. It's making everything harder to some extent, but it's making some of the defense easier, but it is a real challenge for a business to understand, how is this working, and is this worth my time and effort to sink money into this, or is this just a waste of time? And that can be a real challenge for companies.
Yeah, I think right now there's a lot of confusion with it, but it's kind of like it back in the day when people were bad actors were writing viruses, they found tools to help them do that. And I think AI is going to be, obviously, bad actors are going to find a way of finding ways to exploit different things with AI and try to make money off of it. If a shortcut can be made, someone will find it.
Yeah, the bad actors out there, a lot of them are really good at what they do. And, I can't help thinking that if they devoted that much energy towards a legitimate enterprise, they would build a great company, right? Like they
Yeah.
would build a great business, but, they've decided that playing within the rules is not, what they want to do. And so, they build these criminal enterprises that are really would be the envy of any normal business, right? They've
Yeah.
got customer service, they've got, folks working phone banks. There's ransomware attackers out there that they deploy the ransom note and it says, call this number for customer service. You call the number, it's a legit customer service line. And the person, is saying, all right, thank you for calling. We're going to help you get through this. You just need to pay, Bitcoin, you need to pay a ransom, deposit Bitcoin into this wallet, and we'll give you the keys and to decrypt your data, and you'll be on your way. And, but it's an actual customer service line that you're
is
calling.
This big jump from the original, or is this send money or else, right?
Right. Absolutely. And they tend to be very nice from the get-go. It's yeah, I'm sorry, your data's locked up. Here's what you need to do to unlock it, right? And it's a really it's surreal sometimes dealing with these folks.
Wow, that is fascinating. So if a company wants to strengthen its cyber resilience this year, right now, what is the single most impactful step you think they should take?
Yeah, I would say, if you want to strengthen your resilience, step one is understanding what you do now. Right? If you had an incident right now, what would happen? How would you handle it? And then you just have to do a gap analysis of, all right, just an honest assessment. Did we do that well or did we not do that well? And that honesty is really critical because a lot of companies will go through, that assessment and say, yep, we did everything great. We've got the policies in place. No one's ever read the policies, but we have them, right? And, we know what to do, so we're all fine. And where it really falls apart is if you take an honest lens at it, it's okay. If this were to happen, would we actually follow the playbook that we have? Do we have the people? Do they understand what they're supposed to do? And if you're answering it honestly, a lot of times the answer is no, right? And that's kind of an across the board answer, right? Like it big companies, small companies, mid-size, a lot of them, the answer is no.
Steps that are missed. There's steps that weren't written down. Yeah.
Exactly. And you're not doing yourself any favors if you just gloss over that stuff. You really have to look at where you're falling short and say, all right, we're going to devote time and resources to making sure that we're fixing that. Because it's a little cliche at this point, but it is not a question of whether, it's a question of when. You will get hit by a cyber attack. It's going to happen. And the real question is, are you going to be ready for it or not? So you can devote the resources to it now, or you can devote a lot more resources to it later. And that's really the equation that it boils down to. It's an ounce of prevention and a pound of cure.
I love that. Great advice. Now, I know, Josh, that some of our listeners will want to reach out to you, maybe connect with you, learn more about you. Where's the best place for that to happen?
Yeah, so I am active on LinkedIn. Anyone who wants to connect with me can certainly find me there, and I'm happy to connect. You can also find me through my law firm, Prince Lobel, and I am a partner in the data privacy and security practice group. So, you can certainly reach me there or through LinkedIn, either way. And I do, I try to put out videos and commentary and things like that, particularly through LinkedIn, but I'll do it through whatever channel I can find. Because frankly, the information that I want people to get out or to understand is important. And I think it's important to me that, every business out there and frankly, every individual out there understands what the risks are to them. And I have had, like, my daughter's in high school and she got an email talking about, that the school district had partnered with the federal government and they were offering internships, and you get this 4-hour week internship for $200. And when she told me about this, I was like, $50 an hour sounds pretty rich for the federal government to be offering to a high school kid, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, maybe this is not as legitimate. It came from a legitimate source, but this doesn't sound right. And so I looked into it, and they were asking for your name, your address, whether you had your own bank account, and the name of your bank. And so that immediately I was like,
Red
this
flag.
is not, this is not real. This is, so I told her this, sorry, it sounds great, but it's not great, and let's not do that. And then we found out that the teacher, one of the teachers, their email was compromised and used for this phishing campaign. And a lot of students actually fell for it, right? And that's really what bothers me the most, is that these attackers were targeting teenagers.
Yeah.
And they're targeting teenagers that are just starting to, become independent. They're getting their own bank accounts, and now all of a sudden those bank accounts are being exploited and funds are being stolen. And that really bothers me. And it bothers me just as much that, these small businesses, solo firms and individuals that are just trying to put a business together, they're struggling because there are bad actors out there that are constantly targeting them. And it's so frustrating for me as a practitioner to look around and say, it is so hard to get a business off the ground as is.
Yes.
You don't need someone making it even harder, So
Sure.
I want that message to get out there as broadly as possible, that there are very simple things that you can do, whether you're a small business owner, whether you're an executive at a large enterprise, or whether you're just an individual trying to protect yourself. There are some really simple things you can do to make it that much harder to be a target.
Yeah, because they're going to go for the easy ones. But I agree. Every single day I get emails, and we've trained the staff and everything. And clearly, this is what to look for to know it's fake.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got a client, a small nonprofit. They are, fewer than 10 employees, and they were the target of a very sophisticated attack. And basically their clients were very big companies. And so as the vendor for very big companies, they became a target. And the bad guys did the recon that they needed to do to understand who within this very small nonprofit was responsible for processing invoices and making sure payments were happening. They targeted this small company with a massive spam campaign that kept IT busy, that kept their IT vendor busy. And then at the same time, they deployed a spear phishing email to the one person at that company that they needed to exploit. And they got that person to click through, and they gained access to that person's email. Once they had access to the email, they hijacked email threads, they redirected invoices, and it was just a massive problem for this very small nonprofit that had clients that were much larger and wealthier, and they were processing money for them. But it was a very sophisticated attack. They set up spoof domains, and they kept everyone in the dark throughout this whole process. And then when it came to light, it was like, well, what should you have done differently to protect yourself? It's like, well, maybe there are a couple of things, but really, it's just vigilance. You have to maintain that level of vigilance constantly, because everyone will let their guard down at some point, and when you do, bad things happen.
Yeah, just I like that. Be vigilant, because these phishing emails are getting better and better. It's crazy.
Yeah, and they work. And as silly as each one of them might look individually, it costs next to nothing for the bad guys to send out, 100 million phishing emails.
Right.
And if 1% work, well, that's a million, right? And so if they get access to 1 million people's accounts, imagine the damage they can do. So even if it's a fraction of a percent, it's still a massive quantity of victims that you're talking about.
I agree. Josh, this has been eye-opening and so informative. I really appreciate your time here. And thank you so much for being here.
No, it's my pleasure. And thank you, Marilyn, so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me today for this episode. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do 2 things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, you can connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take the next step with a digital strategist to help you grow your law firm, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to lawmarketingzone.com to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, thanks for listening to Leadership in Law Podcast, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Leadership in Law Podcast. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. There's a whole community of law firm owners out there facing similar challenges and striving for the same success. Head over to our website at lawmarketingzone.com. From there, connect with other listeners, access valuable resources, and stay up to date on the latest episodes. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, keep leading with vision and keep growing your firm.